My husband insisted we never enter the attic, saying it was structurally unsafe. Today I broke the lock. Inside, I found my own death certificate dated 5 years ago, placed neatly beside a small glass jar filled with my hair. Then I heard his footsteps behind me. "You weren't supposed to find your previous life, honey." That's when I realized something far worse than betrayal. I wasn't his wife. I was her replacement. I married him fast. Too fast, according to my friends. But when you're lonely, kindness feels like destiny. He was attentive without being clingy, calm without being cold. He remembered details, my favorite tea, the way I hated loud restaurants, the scar on my wrist I didn't remember getting. That should have scared me. Instead, it felt comforting. The house came with him. Old, quiet, beautiful in a way that didn't ask questions. There was only one rule: never go into the attic. "It's not safe," he said casually the first time I asked. "Old beams, rotting supports. I don't want you getting hurt." He said it like love. I believed him. For years. But there were things I couldn't explain. Mail addressed to someone with my first name, but a different middle name. Photos in albums where faces had been removed carefully, like someone had taken their time. Neighbors who smiled too slowly, like they were comparing me to a memory. Once, a woman at the grocery store stared at me and whispered, "You look just like her." When I asked who she meant, she turned pale and walked away. I told myself it was coincidence. Until today. The lock on the attic door was newer than the rest of the house. Polished. Recently oiled. That detail mattered. I waited until he left for work. The door creaked open like it had been holding its breath. The attic wasn't dusty or abandoned. It was organized. Boxes labeled by year. Shelves wiped clean. A desk with a lamp that still worked. And then I saw it. A manila folder. Inside was a death certificate. My name. My birthday. My face. Attached to an old ID photo I had never taken. Cause of death. Accidental fall. Date 5 years ago. My knees went weak. Next to it sat a glass jar. Inside were strands of hair, dark, long, tied with a ribbon. Mine. Or someone who looked exactly like me. That's when I heard him behind me. Not rushing. Not angry. Calm. "You weren't supposed to find your previous life, honey." I turned slowly. He looked relieved. Like a secret had finally exhaled. "I knew the lock wouldn't hold forever," he said gently. "It never does." I asked him one question. "Who was she?" He smiled sadly. "My wife." The word hit me wrong. My husband had a wife, and she looked like me. He told the story like it was weather. Something that happened, not something he caused. She had fallen. People had believed it was an accident. He had mourned publicly, perfectly. Then he had waited. "Grief leaves a shape," he said. "And some people fit it." I wanted to scream, to run. But fear makes you still when you need answers. "Why me?" I asked. He gestured toward the mirror leaning against the far wall. I hadn't noticed it before. I stepped closer. And that's when the final truth landed. I wasn't identical. I was adjusted. Hair dyed to match. Weight subtly changed. Clothes chosen to echo another woman's style. Even my habits, guided, corrected, praised when I behaved the right way. "I never wanted to replace her," he said softly. "I just needed continuity." Continuity. That word chilled me, because it meant I wasn't chosen. I was installed. He reached out, not threatening, familiar. Don't worry, he said. You're safe. You always have been. That's when I understood the real danger. He didn't see himself as a villain. He saw himself as a caretaker of a narrative. I backed away slowly, keeping my voice steady. I need air, I said. He nodded. Of course. Just don't leave the house tonight. It's better when the story stays consistent. I went downstairs. I didn't grab my phone. I grabbed the folder. Because the only way to survive someone who controls the story is to change it. I don't know how long he's been watching me. I don't know what really happened 5 years ago. But I know this. If there's a death certificate with my name on it, then someone else already lived my life. And tonight, I have to decide whether I'm going to disappear quietly or finally become the person who interrupts the pattern. I didn't run. That surprised me. Every instinct said to grab my phone, bolt for the door, scream for help. But fear doesn't always push you forward. Sometimes it presses you flat, forcing you to think. I went downstairs slowly like I was still playing my role. My role. That word followed me into the kitchen, where the clock ticked too loudly and everything looked exactly the way it always had. Clean. Intentional. Familiar in a way that now felt rehearsed. He followed me, keeping a careful distance. You must be overwhelmed, he said gently. Anyone would be. Anyone. Like this was a situation people found themselves in all the time. I nodded, letting my shoulders slump the way he expected. I realized then how often I had been rewarded for behaving a certain way. Calm, agreeable, trusting. Those traits weren't accidental. They had been cultivated. I poured myself a glass of water and noticed something small but important. There were 2 sets of mugs on the counter. One with a small crack near the handle. One pristine. I had always used the cracked one. A memory surfaced, uninvited. I had once asked why he never used that mug. He'd smiled and said, "It's yours." Not mine. Hers. I excused myself, saying I needed a shower. He didn't argue. He never did when I followed routine. Control works best when it doesn't have to show itself. In the bathroom, I locked the door and stared at my reflection. For the first time, I didn't ask, "Who am I?" I asked, "Who was I meant to be?" My hair. The length. The color. Had I chosen it? Or had it been suggested often enough that it felt like choice? I pulled open a drawer I rarely used. Inside were prescription bottles I didn't recognize. Not mine. Old labels. Different handwriting. Same dosage. Someone had lived in this house before me. Not just lived. Been managed. I heard him moving around downstairs, humming softly, like everything was fine. Like the house was settling back into order. That's when I understood something critical. The attic wasn't the beginning. It was the archive. If he kept records of her, then there had to be more patterns, adjustments, rules I had never questioned because they had been introduced gradually, kindly. Love applied slowly becomes instruction. I wrapped a towel around my shoulders and stepped back into the hallway. He looked up immediately, scanning my face for signs of deviation. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. That was the first lie I told him consciously, and it felt powerful. I asked him a question then carefully. "Did she ever find the attic?" His eyes flickered. "Just once." "No," he said. "She trusted me." That answer told me everything. Trust hadn't saved her. Compliance hadn't saved her. Silence hadn't saved her. I glanced toward the front door. He followed my gaze. "Tomorrow." he said calmly, anticipating my thoughts. We can talk more tomorrow. Tonight, just rest. Rest. As if this were temporary discomfort. As if I were still deciding whether to accept a truth he believed was already fixed. I went to bed that night beside a man who knew more about me than I knew about myself. I didn't sleep. I listened. To his breathing. To the house settling. To the quiet hum of something that had been repeating itself for longer than I realized. At some point near dawn, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't flee blindly. I would observe. Because whatever happened 5 years ago didn't happen in a moment. It happened in steps. And if I wanted to survive, I needed to understand every one of them. The attic showed me the past. Now I needed to find the process. And I had a feeling it was written into the house itself. Hidden in routines. In preferences. In the parts of my life that felt natural until they didn't. He thought I had found a secret. What I had actually found was a pattern. And patterns can be broken. But only if you see them clearly enough to step out at the right moment. For now I would stay. I would smile. I would play my role. Because the most dangerous thing to someone who controls the narrative is a character who suddenly understands the script. Morning came like nothing had changed. That was the most unsettling part. Sunlight through the curtains. The smell of coffee. The sound of him moving through the kitchen with the same calm efficiency he always had. If I hadn't opened the attic door, I would have believed this was just another day. That's how carefully the illusion was built. He greeted me with a smile that searched my face before it offered warmth. Not checking if I was happy, checking if I was consistent. Did you sleep okay? He asked. Yes, I said. Another lie. Another step off the script. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to the stove. I noticed how precise everything was. The mug placed in the same spot. The chair slightly pulled out for me. The routine wasn't about comfort. It was about maintenance. I sat down and forced myself to eat, even though my stomach felt hollow. As I chewed, I replayed years of moments that suddenly felt rehearsed. How he corrected my posture gently. How he praised me when I chose certain clothes. How he discouraged hobbies that took me out of the house too often. I just worry, he'd always said. I want you safe. Safe. The word had always sounded loving. Now it sounded like a boundary. After breakfast, he mentioned errands. Asked if I wanted to come along. I declined, saying I needed to rest. He hesitated just a second too long, then agreed. I won't be gone long, he said. Try not to overthink things. Overthink. Another word that suddenly felt instructional. The moment he left, I moved. Not frantically. Not recklessly. Carefully. I started with the bedroom. Closets first. I went through the clothes I wore most often. Patterns emerged immediately. Colors I wore repeatedly. Cuts that mirrored each other. Styles that felt like me. Until I asked myself when I had first chosen them. Had I ever chosen them? In the back of the closet, I found a box I didn't recognize. Inside were older clothes similar to mine but not quite. Different sizes. Slightly outdated. Belonging to someone else. I felt a cold clarity settle in. I wasn't becoming her. I had been aligned to her. I moved to the study next. The desk drawers were organized obsessively. In the lowest drawer, hidden beneath neatly stacked documents, was a folder with no label. Inside were schedules. Not mine. Daily routines written in his handwriting. Wake times. Preferred meals. Notes like anxious in crowds and responds well to reassurance. I flipped through more pages. There were 2 columns. Before. After. The dates overlapped my arrival in his life. My breath came shallow, but my mind stayed sharp. This wasn't obsession. This was iteration. He wasn't recreating his wife. He was refining her. I heard the garage door in the distance. He was back. I put everything exactly where I found it. Every drawer. Every hanger. Every paper aligned to the millimeter. I returned to the couch and picked up the book I'd been reading for weeks. When he walked in, he scanned the room unconsciously. Everything was in place. Good. How are you feeling? He asked. Better, I said. I think I just needed sleep. Relief flickered across his face. See, he said gently. Things make sense again when you don't dig too deep. Dig. Another word I wouldn't forget. That afternoon, he suggested we clean the attic door together. Said the lock had been bothering him. I agreed without hesitation. Control isn't taken. It's shared until it isn't. As we stood in front of the attic, he replaced the lock with a newer one. Stronger, shinier. There, he said. That's better. Yes, I replied. It was. Because now I knew exactly what he was protecting. That night, while he slept, I lay awake mapping the house in my head. Not just rooms, but behavior. Triggers. Routines. Points where he expected predictability. He believed he had time. He believed I was still processing. What he didn't know was that I had stopped reacting. I was planning. The attic showed me who he lost. The house showed me how. Now I needed to know why. And why is never answered by the past alone. It reveals itself in repetition. I wasn't his wife. I wasn't her replacement. I was his next version. And if I wanted to survive, I couldn't run from the story. I had to stay inside it long enough to learn where it breaks. I started paying attention to the smallest things. Not the dramatic moments, the quiet ones. The way he checked the locks every night in the same order. The way he always asked the same questions in the same tone. The way he corrected my phrasing when I told stories, nudging them toward versions that sounded smoother. I realized then that the house wasn't just a place. It was a system. Every room had a purpose. Every habit reinforced something. Even comfort had been engineered. The calm wasn't natural. It was enforced through repetition. And I had participated without realizing it. That realization didn't make me panic. It made me alert. I began to test the edges of the pattern carefully. Small changes, almost invisible. I moved a chair an inch to the left. I wore a color I rarely chose. I skipped a routine he expected me to follow. Nothing big. Just enough to see what happened. He noticed. Not immediately, but eventually. Did you change your hair? He asked one evening, though I hadn't. No, I said. He smiled, but his eyes lingered, searching for confirmation. That smile stayed a beat too long. Patterns don't like deviation. The next day, he suggested a walk. Same path we always took. Same timing. I agreed, then slowed my pace unexpectedly. He adjusted his stride without comment. I stopped near a corner I'd never paused at before. Everything okay? He asked. Yes, I said. Just noticing things. That word, noticing, changed his posture. Subtle but real. He shifted his weight. Looked around. Then nodded. Good, he said. Awareness is healthy. But his hand tightened slightly on the strap of his bag. I understood then that he didn't just monitor behavior. He monitored awareness. That night, I pretended to sleep while he lay awake beside me. I could feel the calculation in the silence. When someone builds a system, they're always listening for faults. I waited. At some point, he got up quietly and walked toward the study. I counted seconds, waited longer than fear wanted me to. Then I followed. He didn't hear me at first. He was standing at the desk, flipping through the same folder I had seen earlier, the one with schedules and notes. But there was something new. A page added recently. It had my name at the top. My stomach tightened, but my mind stayed clear. I leaned closer just enough to read the words upside down. Responding well. Minor resistance after attic exposure. Reinforce routines. Increase reassurance. I stepped back silently. This wasn't grief. This was management. He wasn't reliving the past. He was optimizing the present. When he returned to bed, he placed his arm around me like always. Familiar. Reassuring. Containing. "You okay?" he whispered. "Yes," I said. Another lie. But this one wasn't defensive. It was strategic. I understood something important now. He didn't see himself as controlling me. He saw himself as preserving stability. That made him dangerous in a very specific way. Because he believed disruption was the threat, not him. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done before. I asked about his first wife. Not accusingly. Not emotionally. Curiously. What was she like? I asked, stirring my coffee. He froze for half a second, then recovered. "Gentle," he said. "Predictable. She trusted me." I nodded. "Did she ever want more?" He smiled. "She didn't need to." That answer told me everything. Needing more had been unacceptable. Difference had been a flaw. And that meant the danger wasn't the attic or the documents or even the death certificate. The danger was becoming myself. Because the moment I stopped fitting the pattern, I would stop being useful. I finished my coffee and stood up. "I'm going to start volunteering again," I said casually. "I miss being out." He looked at me carefully. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Things have been intense." "Yes," I replied. "I feel ready." He nodded slowly, filing the information away. "Let's talk about schedules tonight," he said. "Schedules. Always schedules." I smiled and kissed his cheek, then left the room. He thought he was adjusting the system. What he didn't realize was this. Every system has a breaking point. And I was getting closer to finding it, not by fighting, not by fleeing, but by learning exactly how much truth it could tolerate before it collapsed. For now I stayed. I followed the routine. I smiled at the right moments, because the safest place to understand a machine is from the inside while it still thinks you belong to it. I learned to measure time differently. Not by clocks, but by his tolerance. How long he could handle silence. How much unpredictability he could absorb before correcting it. How many small deviations he allowed before adjusting the system back into place. Because that's what this was. A system. And systems always reveal themselves when you stop behaving like a variable and start acting like a constant that doesn't obey the formula. I began volunteering 3 days a week. He didn't object, but he restructured. He adjusted dinner times. Asked more questions when I returned home. Wanted to know who I spoke to, what I did, how I felt. Not aggressively, methodically, like someone updating a file. I answered carefully, truthful enough to sound natural, vague enough to protect myself. One afternoon I mentioned a name casually. A woman I'd met at the volunteer center. His reaction was instant but controlled. "What does she do?" he asked. I shrugged. "Listening mostly." That was the wrong answer. Listening was my role in this house. He smiled, but his fingers tapped once on the counter. That night, he suggested we reorganize the study together. Reorganize meant reassert control. I agreed. As we moved books and papers, he narrated decisions aloud. Where things belonged. Why certain items were better together. How order reduced stress. Chaos invites misunderstanding, he said. I nodded. Inside, I translated. Chaos invites autonomy. While he stepped out to take a call, I opened the bottom drawer again. The one he thought I hadn't noticed. The folder was thicker now. More pages. More notes. But something else caught my attention. A timeline. 3 names. Dates. One crossed out. One faded. One written darker, heavier. Mine. I didn't read further. I didn't need to. What mattered wasn't how many times this had happened. What mattered was that it had happened before. When he returned, I closed the drawer exactly as it had been. He didn't check. He trusted the pattern. That trust was his weakness. Later that evening, he told me he'd scheduled a weekend trip. Just us, he said. A reset. Reset. Another system word. Where we were going didn't matter as much as why. Isolation simplifies management. I didn't refuse. Refusal would have broken character too quickly. Instead, I asked a question I knew would matter. Can we take separate cars? I said lightly. I might want to stay longer. He laughed softly. Why would you want to do that? I smiled. Just a feeling. He studied my face longer than usual, then nodded. We'll talk about it. That meant no. But the fact that he didn't say no immediately told me something. He was recalculating. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to his breathing, mapping how evenly it stayed, how little emotion ever disturbed it. People think monsters look wild. They don't. They look stable. The next morning I made another adjustment. I left the house without telling him. Not for long. Just long enough to disrupt the expected check-in. When I returned, he was waiting in the kitchen. Everything okay? He asked calmly. Yes, I said. I lost track of time. His eyes searched my face. You usually text. Usually. There it was. I met his gaze. I'm trying not to be so predictable, I said. The air shifted. Just a fraction. He smiled slowly. Predictability keeps people safe, he said. I answered gently. So does trust. We stood there, neither moving. I realized then that we were no longer married in the way he intended. We were competing models. His order through control. Mine survival through awareness. He believed I was adjusting. What he didn't know was that I was doing something else entirely. I was documenting. Not on paper. Not digitally. In my head. His phrases. His reactions. His thresholds. Because the attic didn't hold the real secret. The real secret was how he decided someone no longer fit. And once I understood that, I could choose exactly when to stop fitting. For now I stayed inside the system. But not because I was trapped. Because I was learning how to step out without triggering the alarm. And when that moment came, it wouldn't be dramatic. It would be final. Not for the story. For the pattern. And I was closer than he realized. I stopped thinking about escape. That surprised me. Not because I didn't want freedom, but because I realized escape was exactly what the system expected when something went wrong. Panic. Flight. A sudden break that could be explained away, managed, rewritten. That's how the others must have disappeared. Not in chaos, in missteps. So instead, I focused on belonging, the kind that doesn't look earned, just assumed. I leaned into routine again, not to submit, but to camouflage. When you match the pattern closely enough, you become invisible inside it. He relaxed. That told me everything. He began speaking more freely around me. Not careless, confident. Confidence always arrives when someone believes control has been restored. You seem more like yourself again, he said one night, brushing past me in the hallway. I wondered which version he meant. I mirrored his language back to him. I think I just needed perspective, I said. Things make more sense when you stop fighting them. He smiled. Yes, he said. Exactly. That was the moment I understood the most dangerous thing about him. He didn't want obedience. He wanted agreement. Agreement validated the system. Agreement meant the structure was intact. Resistance could be explained as stress, confusion, grief. Agreement meant permanence. Over the next few days, he loosened rules he'd enforced tightly before. The front door stayed unlocked longer. He stopped asking as many questions when I came home. The attic door remained sealed, but he no longer hovered near it. People relax around patterns they think have stabilized. That's when you learn the most. I began noticing how he spoke about the past, not the details but the framing. How he always referred to it as a time of disruption. How he never said names unless necessary. How he spoke about loss as something that needed to be contained, not processed. Containment was his religion. One afternoon, while folding laundry together, he said something almost offhand. Some people don't handle continuity very well, he said. They resist it. They want change. And that's bad. I asked. He paused, then smiled. Change is unpredictable. Predictable. Safe. Controlled. I nodded, letting the answer sit where he wanted it to. Later that evening, I made another quiet shift. I left one of the attic keys, not the main one, but the spare I'd found hidden in a coat pocket, on the kitchen counter. Not in plain sight, just visible enough. I didn't mention it. He noticed within minutes. He picked it up, turned it over in his hand, then set it back down exactly where it had been. He didn't say a word. But that night he didn't sleep. Neither did I. We lay there, parallel, listening to the same silence for different reasons. I felt the tension coil, slow and deliberate. He was recalculating. I had introduced ambiguity. Ambiguity forces a system to reveal its priorities. The next morning, he suggested therapy, couples counseling. Not because we were struggling, because he believed alignment needed reinforcement. Just to make sure we're communicating well, he said. I agreed immediately. Too quickly. His eyes flickered again. Yes, I added lightly. I think it's important to have an outside perspective. That word, outside, landed wrong. He nodded, but his jaw tightened. Later that day, I noticed something new on the refrigerator. A printed schedule for the upcoming week. Color-coded, balanced, familiar. But there was a change. My volunteer hours were shortened. I hadn't agreed to that. I said nothing. Instead, I moved one appointment back into its original place, neatly, with a pen that matched his handwriting as closely as I could manage. That evening, he studied the schedule longer than usual. You adjusted this, he said. Yes, I replied calmly. It felt more accurate. He didn't correct it. He didn't argue. He stared at it as if trying to remember when the system had stopped being exclusively his. That was the real shift. Not rebellion. Not escape. Authorship. I wasn't rejecting the structure. I was rewriting it from the inside. And he could feel that. Because systems don't collapse when you fight them. They collapse when someone else learns how to operate them better. Right now, we're both aware of the same thing. Something is changing. He thinks he's guiding it. I know I'm measuring it. And somewhere between control and awareness, the pattern is beginning to strain, quietly, invisibly, just enough to matter. I don't know yet when it will break. But I know this. It will break where it believes it's strongest. And until then, I stay. I watch. I remember. Because the person who understands the system best is no longer the one who built it. It's the one who finally sees it clearly enough to step outside at exactly the right moment. I began to understand something unsettling. The house wasn't just a place where things happened. It was a filter. It filtered behavior, reactions, even thoughts. The longer you lived inside it, the easier it became to confuse calm with consent. I had done that for years without knowing it. The structure rewarded stillness, discouraged curiosity, and framed questions as instability. He didn't need to raise his voice. The system did the work for him. After the schedule incident, he became quieter. Not distant, watchful. He paid attention to how I moved through rooms, how often I paused, how long I stayed silent before answering questions. I matched him. If he waited, I waited longer. If he softened his tone, I mirrored it precisely. If he framed something as concern, I acknowledged it as care. Control struggles when it can't find contrast. One evening, he mentioned the previous owner of the house. Casually. Strange thing, he said while rinsing a plate. He said the attic used to be his favorite place. I didn't look up. That is strange, I replied. He glanced at me, gauging reaction. But people say things, I added, especially when they don't want to let go. The plate slipped slightly in his hands, just enough to clink against the sink. That sound told me everything. He wasn't used to me interpreting him. Later that night, I checked the study again. Not searching, confirming. The folder was still there. The notes unchanged. But something new had appeared beside it. A small digital recorder. Charging. I didn't touch it. Touching would have acknowledged it. Instead, I moved the lamp a few inches closer to the edge of the desk. Subtle, almost unnoticeable. When he came in later, his eyes went straight to it. He adjusted the lamp back, then paused. He hadn't remembered placing it there. The first sign of strain in any system is uncertainty about authorship. The next morning, he suggested a different route for our walk. One we'd never taken before. Narrower streets. Fewer people. Just to change things up, he said. I smiled. Change can be good. He hesitated, then nodded. We walked side by side in silence. I noticed how often he scanned reflections, windows, parked cars, glass doors. He wasn't watching for danger. He was watching for witnesses. At the corner, I stopped suddenly. Do you remember the first time we came here? I asked. He frowned. We've never been here. I tilted my head. Are you sure? He searched his memory, then shook his head. I would remember. Maybe, I said. Or maybe you decided it didn't matter. The rest of the walk was quieter. Back at the house, he received a call. He stepped outside to take it. I stayed near the doorway listening, not to the words but to the tone. Controlled, reassuring, directive. He ended the call and turned back toward me. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I was just thinking." He smiled. "About what?" How easy it is to confuse continuity with truth. The smile stayed on his face a moment too long. That afternoon, I noticed the recorder was gone. Not hidden. Removed. That was important. When someone removes surveillance instead of relocating it, it means they're unsure whether it's working or whether it's been noticed. He was no longer confident the system belonged only to him. That night, he brought up the attic again. "We should probably have it professionally sealed," he said. "For safety." I nodded. "That makes sense." He studied me closely. "You're being very reasonable lately," he said. "So are you," I replied. That landed differently than he expected. We were no longer playing opposing roles. We were sharing the same language. And that's dangerous for someone who needs to control the meaning of words. Because once two people speak the same language inside a system, the system has to choose who it listens to. Right now it's listening to both of us. And it won't be able to do that for long. Not without revealing which voice it's been protecting all along. So I stay. I watch the pauses grow longer. I watch the routines loosen. I watch certainty give way to recalculation. He thinks he's stabilizing the house. I know I'm testing its limits. And the most important thing I've learned is this. The moment a system starts explaining itself, it's already failing. For now, I let it explain. Because every explanation tells me exactly where it's weakest. I started cataloging his reactions the way he once cataloged mine. Not emotionally, clinically. What unsettled him wasn't resistance. It was misalignment. When my words matched his language but not his intent. When I agreed without surrendering authorship. When calm stopped meaning compliance. That's when he lost his footing. He began narrating more. Explaining choices out loud. Justifying small decisions that didn't need justification. Systems explain themselves when they sense drift. At dinner one night, he told a story about work, something mundane, polished, harmless. Halfway through, he paused and corrected himself. "No, actually, that part happened later." He looked at me, waiting for affirmation. I nodded once. He continued, then stopped again. Or maybe it was earlier. Silence stretched. He cleared his throat and finished the story without meeting my eyes. Memory isn't fragile by accident. It fractures under pressure. The next morning, he reorganized the pantry. Everything labeled. Everything aligned. I watched him work with focused intensity, restoring order to a space that hadn't asked for it. "Order helps me think," he said, not looking up. "Does it?" I asked. "Or does it help you decide what doesn't get to exist?" The label maker paused mid-print. He didn't answer. Later, I noticed a new rule had quietly appeared. The side door, rarely used, was now locked during the day. No announcement. No discussion. Just a change folded into routine. I didn't comment. I started using the front door more. Not dramatically. Just consistently. Consistency challenges authority more than rebellion ever could. That afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was brief, professional, and carefully neutral. "This is regarding a property record. Please return our call." Property. Not the attic. Not the basement. The house. I didn't call back immediately. I waited until evening, until he was home and settled, until the rhythm of the house had resumed its familiar cadence. Then I asked casually, "Do you remember when you first bought the house?" He answered without hesitation, "Yes." I nodded. "Do you remember the inspection?" He hesitated. "Why?" he asked. "Just curious," I said. "Sometimes inspections miss things." His eyes flicked toward the ceiling, toward the attic before returning to me. "They didn't miss anything important," he said. Important. Another word that carried boundaries. That night he dreamed aloud. Not words, sounds. Fragments. A sharp inhale. A mutter no. Pause that felt like listening. I lay still, counting breaths, noting the rhythm. People reveal more in sleep than they ever do awake. In the morning, he was quieter than usual. His movements careful. His questions fewer. He watched me from doorways instead of directly. Observation had replaced confidence. I called the number back while he showered. The voice on the other end was polite, precise. "We're reviewing a discrepancy," they said. "A document filed 5 years ago appears to conflict with current occupancy." Discrepancy. Conflict. Occupancy. I asked what document. There was a pause. "A death record," they said. "We're trying to confirm the identity." I thanked them and ended the call. When he came downstairs, I was already seated at the table. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I had a strange dream." "Oh." He poured coffee, steady hands, careful posture. "I dreamed someone confused continuity with permanence," I said, "and thought if they controlled the sequence, they could control the outcome." He set the pot down slowly. "That sounds unsettling," he said. "It was," I agreed, "until I woke up." He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Dreams are just dreams," he said. "Sometimes," I replied. "They're rehearsals." The house felt different that day. Not heavier, alert. Like it was waiting to see which version of the story would be enforced. He believed he still held the pen. What he hadn't noticed yet was that the margins were filling up. With notes. With questions. With alternatives he hadn't authorized. I wasn't trying to expose him. I was letting the system encounter reality, a force it had never learned to manage. And reality doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. For now I stayed within the lines. I followed the routines. I spoke the language. I nodded at the right moments. Because the closer you get to understanding how something works, the clearer it becomes exactly where it cannot bend without breaking. And we were getting very close to that point. The house began reacting before he did. That was the first sign. Small things stopped behaving the way they were supposed to. A door that usually latched didn't. A light that turned on by itself after being switched off. Pipes that clicked at night, not loudly, just enough to interrupt thought. He noticed. I could tell by the way he paused when sounds occurred, listening not for noise but for pattern disruption. Systems don't fear chaos. They fear unpredictability. He started walking through rooms more slowly, like he was recalibrating his mental map, touching surfaces, straightening objects that weren't out of place, restoring symmetry wherever he could find it. Control seeks reassurance. One afternoon, he asked me a question that felt casual but wasn't. "Do you ever feel like the house remembers things we don't?" I looked up from the book I wasn't really reading. "Sometimes," I said. "Memory doesn't need permission to stay." He nodded, but his jaw tightened. That answer didn't fit neatly into reassurance or denial. That night I noticed something else. He had started locking the attic door from the inside. Not just securing it, monitoring it. He installed a small sensor. Discreet. Almost invisible unless you knew where to look. I only noticed because he checked it too often, glancing at his phone when he thought I wasn't watching. Surveillance increases when confidence drops. I didn't mention it. Instead, I did something else. I stopped asking questions. Not because I had answers, but because questions had become unnecessary. I was watching reactions now, not explanations. Watching how he moved when things didn't align. Watching what he tried to correct first when the illusion wavered. He began explaining himself more. Why certain doors stayed locked. Why certain calls needed privacy. Why some topics were better left alone for now. For now. Temporary language always hides permanence. I noticed how often he used the word we when describing decisions he had already made. We decided this was safer. We agreed this was better. I didn't correct him. I let the pronouns float unanswered. At dinner one evening, I told a story from my childhood, something irrelevant, something that didn't fit the narrative he preferred. He listened politely, then interrupted gently. "That's not how you usually describe it," he said. I smiled. People remember differently over time. "That's true," he said quickly. "Too quickly. Memory changes." "Sometimes," I replied. "Sometimes it sharpens." The room went quiet. He finished his meal without speaking. Later, as we prepared for bed, he asked another question, this one more direct. "Do you feel safe here?" I considered my answer carefully. "Yes," I said. "I feel aware." That wasn't what he wanted to hear. Safety was his metric. Awareness was mine. He turned off the light and lay awake longer than usual. I could feel the tension beside me, coiled and restless. When he finally slept, it wasn't deeply. He shifted often, breath uneven. In the morning, he was decisive again. He suggested we host a small gathering. Friends, neighbors, familiar faces, normalcy as reinforcement. Social validation stabilizes systems. I agreed. During the gathering, I watched him closely. How he positioned himself between me and certain people. How he redirected conversations that drifted toward the past. How he laughed louder than necessary, filling space before silence could settle. He was performing maintenance. I disrupted it quietly. I mentioned the fire. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just a passing reference like it was always part of the story. The room stilled. Not everyone noticed, but he did. His smile faltered for half a second. Someone asked a question. "Fire." He answered before I could. "Long time ago," he said. "Nothing important." I tilted my head. "It was important to me," I said calmly. Silence followed. Not hostile. Curious. He recovered quickly, but something had shifted. He stood closer to me for the rest of the evening. His hand rested on my shoulder more often than usual. Containment. After everyone left, he didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "You didn't need to bring that up." "I wasn't bringing it up," I replied. "I was acknowledging it. Those are not the same thing." He looked at me like he was seeing a variable he hadn't accounted for. Later that night, I heard him in the attic. Not moving things. Standing still. Listening. I stayed in bed, eyes open, counting steps, tracking time. He believed the attic was the problem. He was wrong. The attic was just where the truth waited. The real instability was happening somewhere else, in the part of the system that assumed I would stay silent once I understood the rules. That assumption was already failing. And when assumptions fail, systems don't adapt. They fracture. Not all at once. In hairline cracks. Quiet ones. The kind that only become visible when the structure is already under strain. And we were well past that point now. The truth didn't come out in a scream. Came out in paperwork. That was the part he never expected. I didn't confront him. I didn't accuse him. I didn't run. Instead, I waited until he left for work one morning, confident again, calm again, because control had returned to him. Or so he thought. I drove to the county records office. I didn't even know what I was looking for at first. I just knew my name didn't feel like it belonged only to me anymore. When you start feeling like a guest in your own life, something is wrong at the foundation. The clerk was polite. Routine. Bored. I asked for death records. 5 years ago. My name came up immediately. No hesitation. No error message. There it was. My full legal name. My date of birth. My social security number. Cause of death. Accidental fall. Location: this house. My hand shook, but my voice stayed steady. That can't be right, I said. The clerk frowned. It happens sometimes. Identity confusion. But then she looked closer. And stopped. This certificate was amended, she said slowly. Someone requested changes after filing. Who? I asked. She checked the log. My husband's name. Not as a spouse. As a guardian. The word felt wrong in my chest. That's when everything snapped into place. I wasn't his wife. I was his solution. The previous woman, his actual wife, had died. Accident or not, I didn't yet know. But what I did know was this. Instead of grieving, he replaced. He found someone similar enough. Isolated enough. Trusting enough. And then he erased me. Not physically. Legally. Socially. Quietly. He changed records. Controlled narratives. Introduced me to people who only knew the version of me he approved. He kept me away from old friends, old jobs, old locations, not out of love but out of risk management. I went home that evening and acted normal. I cooked dinner. I smiled. I asked about his day. He relaxed. Systems always relax when they believe they're winning. That night after he fell asleep, I packed a bag. Just essentials. Then I left something on the kitchen table. Not a note. A folder. Inside it, a copy of my death certificate. The amendment request with his signature. A single question written in ink. If I was dead, who have you been living with? I didn't wait to hear his answer. Because the ending wasn't about him anymore. The ending was me walking back into the world. Alive, documented, undeniable. Weeks later, I heard he told people I had left suddenly. He was right. I did. But this time I left with my name, my history, and my future intact. And wherever he is now, I know one thing keeps him awake at night. Not fear of punishment. Not fear of exposure. But fear of the one thing he can no longer control. A woman who knows exactly who she is.